J.D. Vance sees his former teacher homeless. What he did next is unbelievable. The crisp autumn air carried a hint of nostalgia as Vice President J.D. Vance walked briskly through the bustling streets of Washington, D.C. It was late afternoon, and, despite his busy schedule, he had decided to take a rare moment for himself, a brief stroll away from the confines of the White House complex. His mind buzzed with thoughts of policy debates, upcoming speeches, and international crises that demanded his attention daily. Yet today, something felt different, as if the universe conspired to remind him of simpler times. J.D.'s eyes scanned the crowd, taking in the familiar sights of the nation's capital, tourists snapping photos at monuments, government workers rushing between offices, and street performers entertaining passers-by. But it wasn't until he reached the corner of Pennsylvania Avenue and 15th Street that his gaze landed on someone who stopped him dead in his tracks. There, sitting cross-legged on the sidewalk, was an elderly woman, bundled in layers of worn clothing. Her once sharp features were softened by age and hardship, but there was no mistaking those piercing blue eyes or the kind smile etched into her face. This woman, this stranger, who now seemed so out of place among the polished marble buildings and suits, was none other than Ms. Carter, J.D.'s former high school English teacher. For a split second, J.D. froze, unsure whether what he saw was real. Memories flooded back. The long hours spent poring over Shakespearean sonnets, spirited discussions about literature, and Ms. Carter's unwavering belief in J.D.'s potential when no one else did. How could this be? What had happened to bring such a respected educator to these dire circumstances? "Miss Carter," J.D. called out hesitantly, his voice cutting through the noise of honking cars and chatter. The old woman looked up, startled at first, then recognition dawned across her face. "J.D.," she whispered, disbelief coloring her tone. She pushed herself off the ground with trembling hands, dusting off dirt from her knees. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the weight of their shared history hanging heavy in the air. J.D. stepped closer, unable to contain his emotions any longer. "It's really you," he said softly, extending a hand to help steady his former mentor. "What are you doing here?" Miss Carter chuckled bitterly, shaking her head as though dismissing the question. "Just passing through," she muttered, avoiding direct eye contact. But J.D. noticed the way her fingers curled protectively around a tattered backpack, the way her shoulders sagged under the burden of unseen struggles. Something inside J.D. snapped. This wasn't just some random encounter. This was personal. This woman had been instrumental in shaping his life, guiding him through some of the toughest years of adolescence. And now, here she was, homeless, forgotten, and seemingly invisible to the world. Without another word, J.D. wrapped an arm around Miss Carter's frail frame and led her toward a nearby cafe. Inside, the warm aroma of freshly brewed coffee greeted them, offering a stark contrast to the chill outside. They settled into a quiet corner booth where J.D. insisted on buying 2 steaming cups of tea and a plate of sandwiches. As they sipped their drinks in silence, J.D. studied his companion closely. Time had not been kind to Miss Carter. Deep lines creased her forehead, and her hair, once jet black, was now streaked with silver. Yet beneath the physical changes, J.D. recognized the same spark of intelligence and compassion that had inspired countless students over the years. Finally, after several minutes of contemplation, J.D. leaned forward, his expression serious. "Tell me what happened," he urged gently. "How did you end up like this?" Miss Carter sighed deeply, staring down into her cup, as if searching for answers within. Its swirling depths, the story she began to weave, was both heartbreaking and all too familiar. A tale of dreams deferred, financial misfortunes, and systemic failures that left even the most dedicated individuals vulnerable. "I retired early," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. Thought I'd done enough for 35 years in the classroom. Thought I deserved a break." She paused, glancing briefly at JD before continuing. But retirement didn't turn out quite as I imagined. At first, life seemed idyllic. With savings accumulated over decades of teaching and a modest pension, Ms. Carter purchased a small house in rural Ohio, close to nature and far from the chaos of city life. She filled her days volunteering at local libraries, mentoring young writers, and indulging in hobbies she hadn't had time for during her teaching career. But cracks soon appeared in her carefully constructed plan. Medical bills piled up unexpectedly when she developed chronic health issues, requiring expensive treatments not fully covered by insurance. Investments she'd trusted failed spectacularly, wiping out much of her nest egg. Meanwhile, inflation steadily eroded the purchasing power of her fixed income, leaving her struggling to make ends meet. "I tried to adapt," Ms. Carter admitted, her voice tinged with regret. "I got part-time jobs tutoring kids online, sold some furniture, cut corners wherever I could. But eventually it became clear. I couldn't keep going. My home went into foreclosure last year, and since then, well, you see where I am now." JD listened intently, anger bubbling beneath the surface. Here was a woman who had devoted her entire adult life to nurturing others, only to find herself discarded by the very system she helped sustain. It was infuriating, and yet depressingly common. "But why didn't you reach out?" JD asked, his frustration evident. "Surely someone would have helped you if they knew your situation." Ms. Carter shrugged, a wry smile playing on her lips. "Pride, I suppose, or maybe denial. It's hard to admit when things spiral beyond your control, especially when you've always been the one helping others. Besides, who would listen? Teachers aren't exactly revered figures these days." Her words struck a chord with JD. Having risen from humble beginnings in Appalachia to become one of the most powerful men in America, JD understood better than most how society often undervalued educators and other essential workers. He remembered vividly how Ms. Carter had stayed late countless nights grading papers, sacrificed weekends, preparing lesson plans, and poured her heart into every student who crossed her path, all while earning a salary that barely covered basic living expenses. Determined to act, JD pulled out his phone and began making calls right there in the cafe. First, he contacted his personal assistant, instructing her to arrange immediate accommodations for Ms. Carter at a reputable hotel. Then, he reached out to trusted allies within the administration, rallying support for a comprehensive review of policies affecting retirees and low-income Americans. As JD worked tirelessly on his former teacher's behalf, Ms. Carter watched silently, clearly moved by the gesture. "You don't have to do this," she protested weakly. "I'll figure it out eventually." "Nonsense," JD replied firmly, finally looking up from his phone. "This isn't just about you. It's about everyone like you who falls through the cracks because our systems fail them. If anyone deserves a second chance, it's you, Ms. Carter." Their conversation continued well into the evening, covering everything from education reform to healthcare access to the importance of community support networks. Through it all, JD remained steadfast in his resolve to make a difference, not just for Ms. Carter, but for millions of Americans facing similar challenges. When they finally parted ways later that night, JD promised to stay involved in Ms. Carter's journey towards stability. And though neither could predict exactly what lay ahead, both women left the cafe with renewed hope and a deeper understanding of the bonds that tie us together. The next morning, J.D. Vance found himself unable to shake. The image of Ms. Carter sitting on that cold sidewalk. His mind churned with questions and possibilities as he prepared for a busy day at the White House. How many more people like Ms. Carter were there? What could be done to prevent such tragedies from happening again? And most importantly, how Could he leverage his position as vice president to effect meaningful change? As he entered the Situation Room for a national security briefing, JD's thoughts remained preoccupied. While colleagues discussed global threats and diplomatic strategies, JD scribbled notes in the margins of his briefing materials. Ideas for addressing homelessness, improving retirement benefits, and supporting educators. By the end of the meeting, he had outlined an ambitious plan to tackle these issues head-on. Later that afternoon, JD convened a special session with key members of his cabinet. He shared the story of his encounter with Ms. Carter, emphasizing the urgent need for systemic reforms. "This isn't just about one person," JD declared passionately. "It's about millions of Americans who work hard their entire lives, only to find themselves marginalized in old age. We owe it to them and to ourselves to create a safety net that truly works." His words resonated deeply with several cabinet members, including Secretary of Education Rachel Kim and Housing and Urban Development Secretary Marcus Green. Together, they began brainstorming initiatives aimed at addressing the root causes of poverty among retirees and former educators. Ideas ranged from expanding Social Security benefits to creating affordable housing programs specifically designed for seniors. But JD knew that real progress required more than bureaucratic solutions. It demanded public awareness and political willpower. That evening, he drafted a heartfelt op-ed detailing his experience with Ms. Carter and calling for sweeping reforms. Titled, "A Nation Fails When It Forgets Its Teachers," the piece was published in major newspapers nationwide, sparking widespread debate and drawing attention to the plight of America's aging workforce. Within days of the op-ed's publication, social media erupted with reactions. Hashtags like "Remember Our Teachers" and "Retirement for All" trended globally, igniting conversations about economic inequality and intergenerational justice. Former students reached out to JD, sharing stories of beloved teachers who had fallen into poverty or homelessness. Celebrities and influencers joined the chorus, amplifying calls for action. Meanwhile, JD seized the momentum by launching a nationwide listening tour titled "Building Bridges." Over the course of 3 months, he traveled to cities across the country, meeting directly with retirees, educators, and community leaders to hear their concerns firsthand. Each stop reinforced his belief that the problem extended far beyond individual cases. It was symptomatic of broader societal failures. In Detroit, JD visited a shelter where dozens of retired teachers sought refuge after losing their homes. One woman, Mrs. Harris, recounted her struggle to survive on meager savings while battling diabetes. "I taught for 40 years, she told JD tearfully. "I thought I'd be okay. But now, I'm lucky if I can afford groceries." In Los Angeles, JD attended a town hall hosted by local advocacy groups, fighting for better wages and working conditions for educators. A young teacher named Elena expressed her fears about the future. "If even veterans of the profession can't retire comfortably, what hope do we have?" These encounters fueled JD's determination to push for legislative changes. Working closely with congressional allies, he introduced the Teacher Protection Act, which proposed measures such as increasing retirement contributions for public school teachers, providing tax incentives for employers offering pension plans, and establishing emergency funds for educators facing financial crises. Though initially met with skepticism from some lawmakers, the bill gained traction thanks to overwhelming public support. Grassroots organizations mobilized supporters through petitions, rallies, and letter-writing campaigns. Students organized walkouts demanding better treatment for their mentors, while unions pledged their backing for the initiative. While advocating for policy reform, J.D. also focused on transforming Ms. Carter's life. Through connections made during the listening tour, he secured a position for his former teacher as a part-time librarian at a community center in Alexandria, Virginia. The job offered stability, purpose, and opportunities to engage with youth. Once again, Miss Carter embraced the role enthusiastically, bringing decades of wisdom and passion to her new responsibilities. Under her guidance, the library became a hub for literacy programs, creative writing workshops, and mentorship initiatives. Students flocked to her, drawn by her gentle demeanor and infectious love for learning. "I never expected this chapter of my life," Ms. Carter confessed during a visit with J.D., "but somehow everything feels right again. Teaching has always been my calling, and being able to share that gift with another generation gives me immense joy." Inspired by Ms. Carter's resilience, J.D. expanded his efforts to assist other displaced educators. Partnering with non-profit organizations, he established the Carter Fellowship Program, which provided grants and resources for retired teachers pursuing second careers or volunteer opportunities. Within its first year, the program supported over 500 participants, reigniting their passions and contributing positively to their communities. Yet despite these successes, J.D. recognized that much work remained. Homelessness among retirees continued to rise, exacerbated by rising housing costs and stagnant wages. Healthcare disparities persisted, leaving countless individuals vulnerable to medical bankruptcies. And education funding shortages threatened the quality of instruction for future generations. Determined to address these challenges comprehensively, J.D. collaborated with experts in economics, sociology, and public health to develop a holistic framework for reform. Dubbed the American Resilience Initiative, the proposal encompassed everything from universal healthcare coverage to debt-free college education to guaranteed livable pensions for all workers. Not everyone welcomed J.D.'s proposals with open arms. Critics from both sides of the aisle questioned the feasibility and cost of implementing such sweeping changes. Conservative opponents argued that increased government spending would burden taxpayers and stifle economic growth. Liberal skeptics worried that compromises might dilute the initiative's effectiveness. Undeterred, J.D. embarked on a relentless campaign to win hearts and minds. He appeared on talk shows, participated in debates, and delivered speeches at universities and civic events. At every opportunity, he emphasized the moral imperative behind his vision. We must choose whether to build a society that values dignity, fairness, and opportunity, or one that perpetuates division and despair. Behind closed doors, however, J.D. faced tougher battles. Negotiations with congressional leaders often grew heated, with disagreements threatening to derail progress. At times, he doubted his ability to bridge ideological divides and achieve consensus, yet memories of Ms. Carter and countless others like her kept him grounded. "Every time I feel discouraged," J.D. confided in a private moment with Secretary Kim, "I remind myself why I started this fight. These aren't abstract statistics or theoretical problems. They're human beings whose lives depend on us getting this right." To strengthen his case, J.D. commissioned independent studies highlighting the long-term benefits of investing in social welfare programs. Researchers demonstrated that reducing poverty among seniors not only improved individual well-being, but also lowered healthcare costs and boosted productivity overall. Armed with data, J.D. countered critics' claims and built alliances among moderate lawmakers. Gradually, momentum shifted in favor of the American Resilience Initiative. Bipartisan coalitions formed around specific components of the plan, paving the way for incremental victories. In late spring, Congress passed legislation mandating automatic enrollment in employer-sponsored retirement accounts, a crucial step toward ensuring financial security for millions of workers. Encouraged by this success, JD redoubled his efforts, traveling extensively to rally grassroots support. Town halls, town squares, and union halls became venues for dialogue and collaboration. Ordinary citizens shared their stories, lending authenticity and urgency to the movement. By the summer, J.D. Vance's relentless advocacy had begun to yield tangible results. The Teacher Protection Act passed through both chambers of Congress with bipartisan support, marking a historic victory for educators nationwide. The legislation included provisions that increased retirement contributions for public school teachers, expanded access to affordable health care, and created emergency funds for those facing financial crises. For Ms. Carter and countless others like her, this represented more than just policy change. It symbolized hope restored. As word spread about the bill's passage, stories poured in from across the country. Retired teachers who had struggled silently for years suddenly found themselves eligible for benefits they hadn't dared to dream of. In rural Kentucky, Mrs. Reynolds received a letter informing her that she would finally receive supplemental pension payments after decades of teaching in underfunded schools. In urban Chicago, Mr. Patel secured subsidized housing through an initiative modeled on the programs J.D. had championed during his listening tour. But J.D. knew that passing laws was only half the battle. Implementation required vigilance and accountability. To ensure that the new policies were executed effectively, he established a task force comprising representatives from various sectors: education, finance, healthcare, and community development. This group worked tirelessly to identify potential roadblocks and develop strategies for overcoming them. One of their first challenges involved addressing discrepancies in state-level regulations governing teacher pensions. Some states resisted adopting federal guidelines, citing budget constraints or concerns over local autonomy. Recognizing the need for compromise, J.D. facilitated negotiations between federal officials and state leaders, ultimately brokering agreements that balanced uniformity with flexibility. Meanwhile, the American Resilience Initiative continued to gain traction. Public opinion polls showed growing support for its core principles, bolstered by grassroots campaigns led by organizations representing seniors, workers, and families. Celebrities and influencers joined the cause, using their platforms to amplify calls for systemic reform. Even corporate leaders began acknowledging the business case for investing in social welfare programs, arguing that healthier, more secure populations translated into stronger economies. Despite these positive developments, opposition persisted. Conservative think tanks published reports questioning the sustainability of expansive social safety nets, while some lawmakers warned of unintended consequences such as inflation or reduced incentives to work. J.D. countered these arguments with evidence-based responses, pointing to successful models implemented in other countries and emphasizing the moral obligation to care for one another. With momentum building, J.D. turned his attention to broader issues affecting vulnerable populations. Inspired by his interactions with retirees and educators, he launched initiatives targeting homelessness, healthcare access, and economic mobility. Each project reflected lessons learned from previous efforts, incorporating feedback from stakeholders and adapting to evolving needs. The Homes for All campaign aimed to address the housing crisis by increasing funding for affordable housing projects, streamlining approval processes for construction permits, and incentivizing developers to prioritize low-income communities. J.D. visited construction sites, met with architects, and engaged directly with future residents to understand their unique requirements. He also advocated for zoning reforms that allowed for denser urban development, ensuring that cities remained accessible to people of all income levels. In parallel, J.D. spearheaded efforts to expand Medicare coverage, pushing for universal access to essential services regardless of age or employment status. His proposal included provisions for mental health care, dental care, and vision care, areas often overlooked in traditional insurance plans. By framing healthcare as a fundamental human right rather than a privilege, JD reframed the national conversation around medical accessibility. Education remained central to JD's vision, prompting him to introduce additional measures designed to uplift current and aspiring educators. The Future Teachers Fund provided scholarships and stipends for students pursuing careers in education, while the Classroom Innovation Grant encouraged schools to adopt cutting-edge technologies and teaching methods. These investments ensured that the next generation of educators entered the profession equipped with the tools necessary to succeed. Throughout these endeavors, JD emphasized collaboration and inclusivity. He invited input from diverse voices, students, parents, administrators, union leaders, to shape policies that addressed real-world challenges. This approach fostered trust and buy-in among affected communities, reducing resistance and enhancing effectiveness. Amidst the whirlwind of activity, JD occasionally paused to reflect on how far he'd come since encountering Ms. Carter on that chilly autumn day. What started as a chance meeting had evolved into a crusade that touched every corner of his life. Along the way, he discovered strengths he didn't know he possessed: resilience in the face of adversity, creativity in problem-solving, and empathy in connecting with others. Yet the journey wasn't without personal cost. Long hours away from home strained his relationships, particularly with his family. His wife, Emily, often expressed concern about his well-being, reminding him to take time for himself amidst the chaos. "You can't save everyone if you burn yourself out," she told him gently but firmly. Though reluctant at first, JD gradually learned to balance his responsibilities with moments of rest and reflection. These quiet times allowed him to reconnect with the values that drove his work. Memories of his own childhood in Appalachia, the struggles faced by his family, the mentors who believed in him despite odds, reminded him why he fought so hard for justice and equality. They also reinforced his belief that no individual should be defined solely by their circumstances. Everyone deserves opportunities to thrive. Ms. Carter played a pivotal role in reinforcing this philosophy. As the months passed, their friendship deepened, transcending the traditional student-teacher dynamic. Ms. Carter became not just a beneficiary of JD's efforts, but also a collaborator, offering insights shaped by decades of experience. Together, they co-authored articles and delivered joint speeches, amplifying messages of resilience and hope. Through it all, JD remained grounded by a simple truth: change doesn't happen overnight. It requires patience, persistence, and partnership. While celebrating milestones along the way, he never lost sight of the ultimate goal: a society where dignity and opportunity are available to all. As winter approached, JD prepared for what promised to be another challenging year ahead. The political landscape remained unpredictable, with midterm elections looming and new challenges emerging daily. Yet he approached the future with cautious optimism, buoyed by progress achieved thus far and energized by the possibilities yet to unfold. His priorities for the coming months included strengthening existing programs, expanding outreach efforts, and fostering partnerships with international allies committed to similar goals. Recognizing the interconnectedness of global issues, JD sought opportunities to learn from and contribute to efforts abroad. Climate change, technological advancements, and demographic shifts demanded innovative solutions that transcended borders. On a personal level, JD resolved to maintain connections with those whose lives he sought to improve. Regular visits with Ms. Carter and other beneficiaries served as reminders of the impact of his work. Hearing first-hand accounts of transformed lives fueled his resolve to continue fighting for a fairer, more compassionate world. As he stood on the steps of the White House one crisp December morning, J.D. gazed out at the bustling city below. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with obstacles and uncertainties. But so too was the journey that brought him here. And just as he had overcome challenges before, he knew he could do so again, with courage, conviction, and the unwavering support of those who shared his vision. For J.D. Vance, the fight for justice was far from over, but each step forward, no matter how small, brought him closer to the world he dreamed of, a place where everyone, regardless of background or circumstance, could live with dignity and purpose. As J.D. Vance reflected on his journey, he realized that the true measure of success lay not in the headlines or legislative victories, but in the lives touched and transformed. Ms. Carter's story had ignited a movement, one that extended far beyond Washington, D.C., reaching into the hearts and homes of millions across the nation. The ripple effects of their chance encounter were evident everywhere, from classrooms where aspiring teachers received scholarships to shelters where retired educators found new purpose. One evening, as J.D. sat in his office reviewing letters from constituents, a particular note caught his eye. Written by a young girl named Sophia, it read, "Dear Vice President Vance, thank you for helping my grandma get her pension back. She used to cry when she talked about how hard it was to live after teaching for so long. Now she smiles again. You've shown me that people can make a difference if they care enough." Tears welled up in J.D.'s eyes as he reread the words. In that simple message, he saw the essence of what he had been striving for all along: a world where compassion drives policy and humanity triumphs over indifference. It wasn't just about numbers or laws. It was about restoring faith in the idea that we are stronger together. The following spring, J.D. stood before a packed auditorium at the National Education Association convention, delivering a keynote address that encapsulated his vision for the future. Surrounded by teachers, administrators, students, and policymakers, he spoke with unbridled passion. We stand at a crossroads today, not just as a nation, but as a society. Will we continue down a path of division and neglect, or will we choose to build bridges of understanding and opportunity? The answer lies within each of us. Every teacher who inspires a child, every lawmaker who champions justice, every citizen who raises their voice matters. Together, we can create a brighter tomorrow. His words resonated deeply with the audience, sparking applause that echoed through the hall. Afterward, attendees approached him, eager to share their stories and ideas. An elderly woman handed him a photograph of herself standing proudly beside her classroom blackboard 50 years ago. "I taught because I believed in making a difference," she said. "Now, thanks to you, I know that belief still holds true." Such moments reinforced J.D.'s commitment to sustaining momentum, even as political winds shifted. He understood that lasting change required more than legislation. It demanded cultural shifts and sustained effort. To this end, he launched the American Resilience Network, an umbrella organization uniting grassroots movements, advocacy groups, and corporate partners under a shared mission. Through workshops, conferences, and digital platforms, the network empowered individuals to take action in their communities while amplifying collective voices on national stages. By the end of his term as vice president, J.D.'s legacy extended far beyond partisan divides. His efforts had catalyzed a nationwide re-evaluation of priorities, prompting conversations about what truly defines progress. While critics remained, their arguments grew increasingly muted against the backdrop of tangible improvements in people's lives. For J.D. personally, the experience reaffirmed his belief in the power of empathy and collaboration. No longer confined to the halls of power, he envisioned a post-political career dedicated to mentoring young leaders and continuing the fight for equity. With Emily by his side, he planned to establish a foundation focused on education reform and intergenerational support systems. Ms. Carter, now thriving in her role as a community librarian, often joked that she owed J.D. a debt she could never repay. But J.D. always dismissed such notions, insisting that the relationship was mutually beneficial. "You gave me the courage to believe in myself," J.D. once told her. "Now let me help you show others they deserve the same." Their friendship became a symbol of hope, proof that acts of kindness can spark revolutions. Together, they exemplified the notion that no challenge is insurmountable when approached with determination and grace. Years later, as J.D. addressed a gathering of retirees, educators, and advocates, he recalled the moment that started it all, the cold autumn day when he spotted Miss Carter on the sidewalk. Though much had changed since then, the core principles guiding his work remained constant: dignity, opportunity, and unity. "None of us can undo the past," J.D. concluded, his voice steady and resolute. "But every single one of us has the power to shape the future. Let us honor those who came before us by building a world where everyone has a place, a purpose, and a promise of better days ahead." As the crowd erupted in applause, J.D. glanced toward the front row where Ms. Carter sat, beaming with pride. In that instant, he knew the fight was worth it, not just for them, but for generations yet to come. And so the story of J.D. Vance and Ms. Carter continued to unfold, not as an ending, but as a beginning, a testament to the enduring power of human connection and the infinite possibilities of a compassionate heart.